The movie begins in an eerie-looking forest, with tall trees blocking out most of the sunlight, except for a few rays sneaking in. Suddenly, a grubby hand grabs a tree, and soon we see the frame of a teenage person in a yellow hoodie running exhaustedly. The figure seems to be extremely tired, as he collapses onto the floor after a few minutes of running. Leaning on his knees and arms, his fingers grab the muddy soil beneath him as he pants. In the next scene, we see a red bus driving on a lone road with tall trees around it. Inside the bus, Nolan, a teenage boy with his gray hoodie up, has his earphones plugged in as he looks out the window. As the bus drives on, we see a teenage girl, Bess, sitting in an adjacent window seat and drawing on a sketch pad. Nolan looks over at her and smiles gently, clearly nursing a crush. A voice on the radio announces a lunar eclipse that will take place soon, and the driver reaches over to dial down the volume, before turning back to ask his teenage passengers if they are going to watch it. Carl, a chubby teenage boy, announces that he already saw something on YouTube, and Queenie, the girl beside him, says she will watch it with her dad. The two bicker for a moment before settling down. After a minute of silence, Reggie, a teenage boy with a nose ring, sitting alone in the back, crushes an empty can and throws it at Nolan up front. It hits him on the head, and when he turns around, Reggie flashes him the middle finger. He retaliates before turning back around to see Bess, his crush, smiling at him. The boys fool around for a minute, and after the scuffle ends, Joe asks Bess if she will be watching the lunar eclipse. When she responds with uncertainty, Carl laughs and nudges Queenie sitting beside him while teasing Nolan and Bess. Queenie is annoyed and stands up abruptly to sit in front, away from his taunting. The voice on the radio continues to talk about the lunar eclipse and how it will be one of the longest and most fascinating. As Reggie teases Joe about driving slowly, Carl suddenly stands up, reading out a riddle from his phone, expecting his friends to find it difficult. Queenie solves it before he can even finish the riddle. Disappointed, he sits down, and Reggie laughs mockingly in the back, saying that Carl has been outsmarted again. Joe announces from the driver's seat that he has a riddle they won't find online. Queenie is eager to hear it, and as Joe recites the riddle from memory, the friends pay rapt attention. After a few minutes of silence with nobody coming up with the answer, Carl leans over to tease Queenie for not being able to solve the riddle, fondly calling her IQ. Joe observes the teenagers through the rearview mirror and smiles at the look of concentration and confusion on their faces. The bus continues to drive on, and soon it turns into a darkened road with high trees blocking out the sunlight. In the middle of the road lies a fallen tree, but instead of turning back, Joe puts the bus in reverse and turns into a smaller trail, even more hidden among the trees. The bus continues on the trail, and soon comes out onto an open but desolate road void of trees and life, with a thick fog hanging overhead. The teenagers all look outside the window, scared, as fog obscures their vision. As the bus inches forward, they come onto a small road with thicker trees than before, and they are forced to stop again by a deer lying in the middle of the road. Joe gets down from the bus after warning his passengers to stay inside, and proceeds to drag the animal away from their path. The friends contemplate going to help him before deciding against it. Joe drags the animal into the trees on the side and straightens up to dust his palms before something makes him stop. The teenagers tease each other and fool around in the bus while waiting for Joe to return. Carl starts to tell his friends a funny story, but they are soon interrupted by Joe climbing in with a gun pointed at his head. The laughter stops abruptly, and the teenagers all have the same terrified and confused expression as a haggard-looking man climbs in after the driver. He menacingly greets them, the pistol in his hand, still pointing at Joe's temple. He orders them to sit down, and Joe urges them to stay calm, assuring them that the madman won't hurt them. The man with the gun is not very impressed at this statement and shoves Joe, ordering him to just sit down and drive, without saying anything. He directs this order to the teenagers too, and they all sit quietly, except Reggie, who maintains his stance stubbornly for a moment, before returning to his seat at the back of the bus. After making Queenie move seats, the gunman turns back to Joe in the driver's seat and orders him to drive. As the doors shut, Carl suddenly remembers something, while staring at the gunman up front. The scene shifts to a few days before, when Carl was having lunch with his father, Chris. He was telling the older man a story of how he helped save a girl from bullies at school, and we can see that his father does not really believe the story, but indulges him anyway. The story gets more intense and outrageous, but his father maintains his expression of false surprise and awe. While trying to describe how he defeated the bullies, he accidentally spills ketchup onto his father's tablet. As Chris wipes off the ketchup, we see a new article displayed on the screen, with the face of a convicted criminal standing out. Carl asks his father about it, and Chris tells him about the serial murderer who just escaped from prison. He explains that they are doing everything possible to find him, because he is a tongue-eating lunatic who seems to have a thing for teenagers. Chris teases Carl by telling him not to worry, since he can take down the escaped convict like he took out the bullies at school. Back to the present, Carl's eyes turn huge as he recognizes the gunman as the escaped convict, Pedro Minghella. Day turns to dusk, and the bus keeps driving. Pedro orders everyone to throw their phones out of the windows, so they can't call for help. They quickly do so, except Reggie, who glares at him from the very last seat. From the driver's seat, Joe calls out Reggie's name and implores him to do what Pedro asks, but the dirty-looking man silences him. Laughing evilly, Pedro walks purposefully towards Reggie at the back of the bus and presses the muzzle of the pistol to his head, all the while assuring him that the gun is real. After letting a string of curses flow out of his mouth, Reggie finally complies and hands his phone to Pedro, who snatches it and complains about teenagers being zombies. He demands they sit back and enjoy the ride, while Joe continues to drive. Joseph continues to drive the bus as it becomes dark around them. Outside there are signs indicating that they are driving into an abandoned military zone. Nolan and Bessie speak to Carl in front of them with their eyes, telling him to knock the pistol out of Pedro's grip, but the boy is too frightened to do it and shakes his head. They both look back towards Reggie and look at the pistol in Pedro's hand again, and this time it's Bessie's turn to shake her head no. At that exact moment, Pedro looks back and the two quickly straighten up, pointing the gun in his direction. Pedro asks Nolan his name, to which the teen answers reluctantly. Pedro comments that his name sounds like something out of a comic book, and then makes a statement about liking comic books as a child, but not in a very friendly way. He tells them how the first thing he ever stole was a pack of cigarettes and comic books, showing how obsessed he was. The bus remains quiet after that, slowly but steadily. They continue driving and go into a channel lined with bright lights. Here, the engine sputters and the bus inexplicably breaks down. Joe curses out loud, and Pedro jumps to his feet, demanding to know what happened. As Joe tries to explain, the muzzle is pressed to his head again, as their captor orders him to fix it. The shaken driver turns the key in the ignition several times, but the engine won't come to life. Pedro gets angry and whirls around to grab Queenie, who is sitting right behind him. The girl whimpers and begs to not be hurt, but Pedro presses the gun against her temple and orders Joe to get the engine fixed if he wants to save her. Joe begs him to stay calm, but Pedro just yells at him to get out of the bus and fix the engine. He warns Joe not to try anything funny, and extends the warning to the teenagers behind him before shoving Queenie out of the bus behind Joe. Going to the side of the bus with Pedro and Queenie on his tail, Joe opens a compartment beneath the bus and starts to look around with a flashlight. The rest of the teens watch from inside the bus, and Kyle starts to freak out. He tells his friends that Pedro is definitely going to murder them, and Bess says that in order to prevent that, they have to disarm their captor. Terrified, Carl shakes his head disapprovingly and says that it will be too dangerous to disarm him now, and Reggie agrees. Joseph can't seem to figure out the problem with the bus and rules it as an engine problem, which is not something he can fix. Suddenly, the lights go off and the whole tunnel goes dark, with the only visible lights coming from inside the bus. Pedro points the gun at Joe uncertainly as everybody is terrified about sudden power outage. As they all look around, a strange noise can be heard coming from the darkness ahead, and they pause to listen closely. Joe points the flashlight into the darkness, but they can't seem to make anything out. He leans forward, and Pedro pokes him in the back with the gun, before telling him to check out what is lurking ahead. Cowardly, he offers to stay with the teenagers and makes Joe walk into the darkness. With just a flashlight for help, Joe walks slowly into the darker part of the tunnel, where the noise came from. Pedro shoves Queenie back into the bus, and they all watch Joe through the windscreen. Joe continues into the darkness, and soon, a low growl is heard and a huge hooded figure straightens up. The teenagers behind him start to freak out and scream as Joe's eyes widen in a similar fashion. Whimpering, he starts to shiver in fear, before letting out a shout as the creature grabs him by the chest. The passengers start to scream and freak out even more, and Pedro yells, trying to keep them quiet as they run towards the back of the bus. He orders them to sit down and be quiet, which they do with extreme difficulty. Trying to think of a solution, he reaches for the steering wheel and notices that the key is not in the ignition. Annoyed, he lets out a loud string of curses before rushing towards Carl. He points the gun at the shaky teenager and orders him to go and get the key off Joe's body. But before Carl can respond, Nolan stands up and offers to go instead of his friend. At the same time, Bess hurries to the front of the bus, and before anyone can stop her, she hops out of the bus. Nolan tries to stop her, but Pedro points the gun at him and makes him stay back. Bess walks slowly and carefully towards Joe, as the others in the bus hold their breaths. When she gets to what is left of Joe, she shakily bends to put her hand in his pocket and retrieve the key. She looks at his face and begins to cry, but then a sound further in the darkness distracts her, so she picks up the torch and flashes it around. A sharp movement startles her, and she races back to the bus. Pedro grabs the key from her and orders Reggie to start the engine, but the boy refuses. Nolan asks Bess about Joe, and with a shake of her head, she tells them that he is not alive. Pedro keeps dangling the key in front of Reggie, and eventually the boy snatches it in annoyance. As Bess continues to cry silently, Reggie tries to start the bus, but the engine will not come to life. Pedro starts getting impatient and threatens to shoot the others if Reggie does not get the bus started immediately. He threatens to start with Queenie, whom he calls Four Eyes. Upset at this statement, Reggie stands up menacingly and tells Pedro to stop referring to Queenie as Four Eyes, and for a moment, the gunman is distracted. Nolan sees his chance and hurriedly shoves Pedro, allowing Reggie to grab the gun from him. With the roles reversed, Pedro stands back for a moment as Reggie points the gun at him. But in a bid to taunt him, Pedro starts to call Reggie names and tells the boy that he will not pull the trigger because he does not have what it takes. Something hits the bus and the teenagers get distracted for a moment, allowing Pedro to snatch the gun back, but this time he points it upwards as the teens start to whimper in fright. Pedro jumps out of the bus and starts to yell at the creature to come out of the darkness. Soon, his request is answered, and at the sight of the monster, he freezes in disbelief and smiles a little. A loud bang outside startles the friends, and they huddle together in the aisle following the sounds. Gunshots go off, causing the girls to scream and the boys to curse. They all freak out, and Reggie makes things worse by tuning on Carl and insulting him. Nolan tries to calm him down, but he tries to fight him too, so the girls step in. Their argument is cut short when a screech goes off right outside the window, and upon seeing the creature that seems to be stalking them, they start to scream and cower in between the chairs. The creature growls and roars, and the friends see that it does not have hands like a human or paws like an animal. After it seems to leave, they try to figure out how to stay alive, and Reggie angrily goes to sit in his usual seat at the back of the bus. The radio comes on, but they can't seem to make out what the other person is saying, and as they try to listen, Reggie gets a dizzy spell at the back of the bus. He stands up and turns towards the back windscreen, pressing his hands and face against it in a trance-like manner, before falling back to his seat. In the next scene, the teens can hear the familiar croaking noise that indicates the arrival of the creature. They huddle together and turn in the direction of the sound, and start to scream when the bus starts to shake. We see the creature's long digits pry the main door open and enter as their screams intensify. They run towards the other door, and Reggie tries to force it open. Bess picks up the flashlight and points it at the creature. This seems to have an effect on it, so they hold it back for a little while as the door finally opens and they run out. Bess leads the way towards a door she saw earlier in the tunnel, and they find themselves in a bunker. After walking for some time, they find a room and decide to stay there after Nolan inspects it. On a nearby wall, Nolan and Bess find a drawing which seems to be the floor plan to the military fort. They decide that they need to find the control tower to find the lights, but Reggie thinks they won't find it. They start to talk about Joe, and Reggie tells the others that Joe knew his dad. Here we find out, as Reggie passes a picture along, that his dad is in prison. Reggie sadly adds that his father is innocent, and is only serving time because he was set up. Nolan takes the floor plans from the wall and takes it over to his friends. He points at the control room, and Bess offers to go with him. Nolan is pleasantly surprised, and Reggie wishes him luck before patting his back knowingly, as Carl and Queenie stifle their laughter. Bess and Nolan set off to find the control tower, and on their way, they have a good conversation. Nolan seizes the opportunity to compliment her on her drawing. He tells her about his mom, who used to paint, and how his favorite painting is of a blue sea by the ocean. Back in the safe room, Carl makes drumming noises and gestures, while listing everything he wants to eat in between beats. Reggie shushes him, but he does not listen, and they just get into a petty fight when Queenie loudly interrupts them. She needs to empty her bladder, and the boys vote Reggie to go with her, allowing Carl to continue drumming. While searching for the control tower, Nolan and Bess come across a huge machine that turned out to be an oversized flashlight. Nolan reminds Bess of how the creature hated the glare from their flashlight. He explains that the presence of the huge machine shows that someone tried to slay the creature. Bess comments that the plan obviously did not work, as she points her blazing torch into an inner cave. Nolan goes to check it out, and through his flashlight, we see a skeleton huddled up in the corner. Reggie and Queenie walk a little while before picking a place for her to pee. Queenie makes Reggie turn around and move away from her before she gets down to business. As she gets busy, Reggie tells her that she looks cute when she is angry, so he plans to get her angry more often. Expecting a response, but not getting any, Reggie calls out to her, unsure of whether to turn around. He eventually decides to, and realizes that she's gone. Scared, he runs back to the safe room to get Carl. On the other hand, Nolan and Bess continue to look around, and eventually, Bess calls out to her friend with good news. They've found the main switchboard. Reggie and Carl continue to run around as they shout out for Queenie, and Reggie repeatedly blames himself. They eventually find her in a dark corridor, screaming beneath the creature, who seems to be feasting on her. Reggie bravely runs over and tries to scare the monster away with the blazing torch in his hand, long enough for Carl to get Queenie to safety. The creature knocks the torch out of Reggie's hand and into a puddle on the floor, snuffing out the fire. At about the same time, Nolan and Bess have found the main power switch, but Nolan is having difficulty turning it on, so Bess helps him. Carl is able to get Queenie to a safer spot, and when they catch their breaths, she remembers Reggie. They retrace their steps, and Carl shouts out for his friend. They see him struggling with the creature, who is currently hovering over him. Something is dripping from the creature's mouth onto Reggie's jaw, and it looks like blood. As his friends try to save him, Reggie whimpers, but is not able to hold off the creature much longer. Just in time, Bess and Nolan finally get the large switch to move, flooding the hallways with light. The creature shrieks and flies off of the boy and out of sight. Carl smiles in relief that his friends found the generator in time. Back in the control room, Nolan and Bess find a small flight of stairs leading downward. They are led to a cave covered in newspapers and pictures of the creature that murdered Joe. They also find books and journals that tell them that someone was obsessed with the creature. Nolan finds a Polaroid picture of a small girl and starts to put the whole story together. They hurry back to tell their friends and stop short in a hallway. A shadow can be seen advancing in a nearby corner, and they wait with bated breaths to see whose shadow it is. Anticlimactically, Reggie and the others turn the corner, and Nolan shares a relieved sigh with Bess. They notice that Queenie is injured and rush over towards them. Carl starts rambling about what happened, but nobody can make out what he's saying, so Nolan calms him down while Bess checks out Queenie's injury. There is a deep bloody gash on her neck, and Reggie announces it's his fault for leaving her alone. He also tries to make them leave, but Bess explains that they can't. They lead them to the control tower and show them the human remains of the man called Julius. Nolan leads them to the underground room and tells them all about the man. He tells them how the man became obsessed with the creature, which he calls the Nocturne Wanderer after it took his sister. He reads to them from Julius's diary, and we see the words taking shape in the next scene. Julius, a young boy in a yellow hoodie, is walking in the woods with his sister, pretending to be on an adventure. As Nolan reads the story, we see Julius trying to read a map, not paying attention to his sister walking into the mouth of the tunnel before them. The little girl sees something before her and stands frozen to the spot. Julius finally notices, but it's too late as a blood-curdling scream floats out of the tunnel. Panic rising in his chest, Julius walks backwards, his eyes fixated on the tunnel and what is inside. Another shriek is heard from the tunnel, and this time from the creature, causing him to turn and run as fast as he can. Tired, he falls to his knees and cries. Later, we see Julius in a police car, staring at his sister's book. The scene changes, and we see a man in his 50s hugging the book to his chest. It's Julius, as an old man who could not get the incident out of his head. He enters the tunnel to find the creature that murdered his sister, with a scared but determined look on his face. Surrounded by candles, he draws the plans for a machine that he plans to use against the flesh-eating creature. In the following scenes, we see him building and sharpening, firing and hammering, while looking at his plans with a picture of his sister before him. Back in the present, the friends mull over the story of a desperate man who put his life at risk to end the creature. They note the theories they have, and that the creature is like a parasite who won't stop looking for Queenie until it's finished. We see how Julius meets his end. In his underground room, after his radio caught the attention of the creature, the teens formulate a plan and decide to stay and finish what Julius started, but Queenie does not want anyone to get hurt on her account. She voices her complaints, and her friends assure her that no one will get left behind. They get into a group hug for a moment before getting to work. They test old equipment, draw up game plans, work together to get the light machine working, and finally formulate a plan to trap the Nocturne Wanderer. They take Queenie to a safe place, set their plan in motion, attracting the creature into the safe room with her bloodied clothes. Their plan seems to be working, until Bess can't flip the switch on her own. Things go haywire, with the light not coming on and Reggie's button not doing anything when he presses it. Nolan almost gets caught by the Nocturne Wanderer, but Bess saves him by causing a distraction. The creature goes after her instead, and almost finds her hiding with Queenie behind a door, but a distant clang distracts it. They lure it into a room with Queenie's bloody clothes lying on the face of a light source. It picks up the clothes as they expect, so they quickly turn on the light, blinding it momentarily. Carl bravely stabs it, buying time for the girls to run. Queenie and Bess make it out of the tunnel alive and breathe out in relief. They look back to see the creature shrieking at them, but unable to leave the darkness of the tunnel. In the distance, the boys race towards them with blazing torches cornering the creature. They get to the Nocturne Wanderer and set it on fire, watching satisfactorily as it burns, shrieking in agony. In the following scenes, Nolan's voice narrates the ending. The answer to the riddle Joe asked earlier in the bus is courage. He tells us how courage was the lesson from their ordeal, and how even though no one took them seriously, it would stay with them forever. At the end, we see police officers checking out the tunnel. One goes further to check out the safe rooms with a flashlight. A loud shriek causes him to stop and look around. He comes face to face with something, and his flashlight goes off as his eyes widen. Another shriek resonates throughout the tunnel. Horror movies never really end, do they?